The smoke from the oil lamp curled upward in lazy spirals as Sarah Zimmerman pressed her trembling hands flat against the rough wooden table, staring at the three men who had just informed her that her family's farm no longer belonged to her. The saloon reeked of whiskey and unwashed bodies, and the piano player in the corner had gone silent the moment Big Jack Thornton slammed down what he claimed was her father's marker, a piece of paper with a scrawled signature that looked nothing like the careful penmanship her father had used to teach her arithmetic when she was 9 years old. It was August of 1873 in Bannack, Montana, and the gold rush that had once made this town a bustling center of commerce had faded to a desperate trickle. Sarah had come to the Silver Dollar Saloon because one of the card dealers had sent word that he had important information about her father, who had died 3 months earlier when his horse threw him on the mountain trail. She had expected maybe a personal effect, perhaps a kind word about the man who had raised her alone after her mother succumbed to cholera. Instead, she found herself surrounded by 3 professional gamblers who insisted that Thomas Zimmerman had wagered the family homestead in a poker game 2 weeks before his death and lost. "That is not my father's signature," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. She was 22 years old, and she had run that farm by herself since her father's accident, rising before dawn to feed the chickens and milk the cows, spending long days mending fences and tending the vegetable garden that kept her fed through the harsh Montana winters. Big Jack Thornton leaned back in his chair, his considerable bulk making the wood creak in protest. "Now, Miss Zimmerman, I understand this is difficult for you, but your father was a gambling man. Everyone in Bannack knows that. He sat at my table more than once. He played cards for pennies and drinks," Sarah shot back. "He would never wager our home. That farm has been in our family since 1864. My parents built that house with their own hands." The second man, a thin fellow with a pencil mustache who went by the name of Silas Reed, tapped the fraudulent marker with one yellowed fingernail. "The law is the law, miss. A gambling debt is a legitimate debt. We will be taking possession of the property at the end of the week." The third man said nothing, just watched her with cold eyes that reminded Sarah of a snake sunning itself on a rock. His name was Dutch Keller, and rumor had it he had killed 2 men in Alder Gulch over a disputed claim. "I will take this to the sheriff," Sarah said, reaching for the paper, but Big Jack was faster. His meaty hand slapped down over it, and he smiled at her with tobacco-stained teeth. "Sheriff Dalton already looked at it. He said it is legal and binding. You have until Saturday to vacate the premises." Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her feet. The farm was all she had, the only thing standing between her and destitution. Without it, she would have nothing. No home, no livelihood, no future in this unforgiving territory. She opened her mouth to argue further when a voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "That signature is a forgery, and we all know it." Every head in the saloon turned toward the speaker. He stood near the bar, one boot resting on the brass rail, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Sarah had noticed him when she first entered, had felt his eyes on her, but she had been too focused on the gamblers to pay him much attention. Now she took in the full measure of him, tall and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt that sat low on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. Big Jack's expression soured. "This is none of your concern, Dalton." "Funny thing," the stranger said, pushing away from the bar and walking toward them with the loose-limbed grace of a natural horseman. "I am making it my concern. See, I knew Tom Zimmerman, rode with him for a spell back in '68 when we were both doing some scouting work for the Army. He showed me a letter from his daughter once, and I remember thinking that both he and the girl had the same distinctive handwriting, all those fancy loops on the capital letters. That signature there?" He nodded toward the marker. "That is the work of someone who learned to write in a hurry and never got the hang of making it look natural." Sarah's heart was hammering now, but for a different reason. This stranger was defending her, putting himself between her and 3 dangerous men, and she did not even know his name. You calling me a cheat? Big Jack rose slowly from his chair, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his waist. I am calling that paper a lie, the stranger said calmly, and I am saying that if you want to claim that farm, you are going to have to prove you won it fair and square, which you cannot do because Tom Zimmerman never sat at a high-stakes table in his life. Silas Reed stood as well, his ferret face twisted with anger. You have no proof of that, Dalton. You are just a drifter with a reputation for sticking your nose where it does not belong. So his name was Dalton, Sarah thought, turning it over in her mind. She studied his profile, the strong jaw, and the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, and wondered what kind of man would risk his life for a stranger's property. Here is what I propose, the stranger, this Dalton, said. You three claim you won that farm in a poker game. Fine. Let us play for it now. You put up the deed, and I will put up cash money. We play one hand, winner takes all. Big Jack's eyes narrowed with suspicion and greed. You do not have that kind of money. From his vest pocket, Dalton produced a thick fold of bills and dropped it on the table with a solid thump. $2,000. That farm is worth maybe half that, but I am feeling generous. One hand of 5-card draw, you win, you take the money and the farm. I win, you give Miss Zimmerman back her property and get out of Bannack for good. Sarah wanted to protest, wanted to tell this stranger that he should not risk his money on her behalf, but the words stuck in her throat. She had no other options, no way to fight these men within the bounds of the law. If this Dalton was willing to gamble for her, she would let him. Dutch Keller finally spoke, his voice like gravel sliding down a tin roof. What makes you think we will honor that bet? Dalton's smile was cold and did not reach his eyes. Because the whole saloon is watching, and because if you try to go back on your word, I will make sure everyone from here to Virginia City knows that Big Jack Thornton is a welsher and a cheat. You will never get an honest game again. The three gamblers exchanged glances. Sarah could see the calculations running behind their eyes, the weighing of risks and rewards. Finally, Big Jack sat back down and gestured to the empty chairs. Deal the cards, he said. The saloon had gone completely silent now, every eye fixed on the table. Dalton pulled out a chair for Sarah first, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Then he sat down across from Big Jack and nodded to the dealer, a nervous young man who had been polishing the same glass for the last 5 minutes. New deck, Dalton said. Miss Zimmerman, you pick it and open it yourself. Sarah's hands were shaking as she took the sealed deck from the dealer's trembling fingers. She broke the seal and spread the cards face up on the table, checking to make sure they were all there and none were marked. When she was satisfied, she gathered them up and handed them back to the dealer. Shuffle well, Dalton said, never taking his eyes off Big Jack. The dealer shuffled 3 times, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite his obvious fear. Then he offered the deck to Silas Reed for the cut. Reed divided the cards roughly in half and set them back together, then nodded for the deal to begin. 5 cards to each man, dealt face down. Sarah could barely breathe as she watched the cards fall, one after another, until both Dalton and Big Jack had their hands. The gamblers picked up their cards slowly, fanning them out to study their options. Big Jack's face remained impassive, but Sarah saw the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth that might have been satisfaction. Her stomach dropped. Dalton, meanwhile, looked at his cards with the same mild interest he might give to a newspaper article about crop prices. Dealer stands pat, the young man announced, his voice cracking slightly. Big Jack tossed 2 cards onto the table. 2 cards. The dealer gave him his draw. Big Jack picked them up, slid them into his hand, and this time Sarah was certain she saw pleasure in his expression. And you, sir? The dealer asked Dalton. I will take 3, Dalton said, discarding. Sarah's heart sank. 3 cards meant he had kept only a pair at best. Big Jack had drawn 2, which suggested he was working with 3 of a kind or maybe 2 pair. The odds were not in Dalton's favor. The dealer gave Dalton his 3 new cards. The stranger picked them up without any change in expression, arranged them in his hand, and then set the cards face down on the table. "Your bet, Thornton," Dalton said. Big Jack made a show of studying his cards one more time. Then he pushed the marker for Sarah's farm to the center of the table, along with a stack of coins. "I bet the farm and $500. "I call," Dalton said, pushing forward an equal amount from his pile of cash. "Show your hand." Big Jack spread his cards with a flourish. 3 queens and 2 fives. A full house. Sarah's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. It was over. This stranger had tried to help her, and now he was going to lose everything he had wagered. "Full house, queens over 5s, Big Jack announced, reaching for the pot. "Better luck next time, Dalton." "Not so fast," Dalton said quietly. He laid down his cards one at a time, 4 10s and a 7 of diamonds. 4 of a kind. The silence that followed was absolute. Big Jack's face went from triumphant to purple with rage in the span of a heartbeat. "That is not possible. The deck was sealed. The deal was fair." "The deal was fair," Dalton agreed, standing up and gathering his winnings. "You just got outplayed, Thornton. Now hand over that deed, and then I suggest you 3 gentlemen get on your horses and leave Bannack's like we agreed." Dutch Keller's hand moved toward his gun, but Dalton was faster. His pistol was out and cocked before Keller's fingers even touched the grip. "Do not make me kill you over a card game," Dalton said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You tried to steal this lady's property with a forged marker, and now you have lost your gamble. Take it like men and walk away." For a long moment, Sarah thought there would be violence. She could feel it hanging in the air like an approaching thunderstorm. Then Silas Reed put a hand on Keller's arm and shook his head. "He's right. We lost. Let us go." Big Jack looked like he wanted to argue, but the watching crowd had pressed closer, and their expressions were not friendly. Bannack might be a rough town, but trying to steal a dead man's property from his daughter did not sit well with most folks. Slowly, reluctantly, Big Jack pulled a folded document from his inside coat pocket and tossed it on the table. "You have made an enemy today, Dalton," he said. "Get in line," Dalton replied. The 3 gamblers pushed their way through the crowd and out into the street. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, unable to process what had just happened. Her farm was safe. This stranger had won it back for her. She looked up at him as he holstered his gun and realized that she did not even know his full name. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know how to repay you for what you just did." He picked up the deed and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. The touch sent a shock of warmth up her arm. "No repayment necessary, Miss Zimmerman. I do not like seeing decent people get cheated." "At least tell me your name," Sarah said, clutching the deed to her chest. "Your full name." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less dangerous. "Quincy Dalton, madam. Most folks just call me Quinn." "Sarah," she said, "Sarah Zimmerman. And I think you should call me Sarah, considering you just saved my life." The crowd was dispersing now that the excitement was over, men returning to their drinks and their own card games. The piano player resumed his tinny rendition of a popular tune, and the normal noise of the saloon gradually returned. Quinn picked up what was left of his money and shoved it back in his pocket, then offered Sarah his arm. "Can I walk you home, Owen?" he asked. "Those 3 might be gone, but they might also be waiting outside to cause trouble." Sarah took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. "The farm is 3 miles outside of town," she said. "That is a long walk." "I have a horse," Quinn said, "and besides, I have nothing better to do with my evening." They stepped out into the cool Montana night, and Sarah breathed in the clean air gratefully after the smoky closeness of the saloon. Quinn's horse, a sturdy bay gelding, was tied at the rail. He untied the reins and led the animal as they began walking down the main street of Bannack, which was little more than a double row of false-fronted buildings and a scattering of tents left over from the gold rush days. "How did you know my father?" Sarah asked after they had walked in silence for a few minutes. She was intensely aware of Quinn's presence beside her, of the easy way he moved and the calm confidence he projected. "We worked together in the summer of '68, Quinn said. The army was having trouble with some renegade raiders who were hitting supply wagons, and they hired a bunch of us as scouts and guards. Your father was good at reading sign, and he never lost his head in a tight spot. I liked him." "What happened after that summer?" Sarah asked. "Where did you go?" Quinn was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the darkening horizon. "Here and there. I did some deputy work in Deadwood for a while, then scouted for a cattle drive. Then hired my gun out to a mining company that was having labor troubles. I drift mostly. Never found a good reason to put down roots." There was something lonely in the way he said it, and Sarah felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. She knew what it was like to be alone, to face the world without anyone to stand beside you. "What brought you to Bannack?" "Heard there might be work at one of the claims up in the hills," Quinn said. "But when I got here and asked around, I found out the claim had played out. I was planning to move on in a day or two, but then I walked into the Silver Dollar and saw you arguing with those gamblers, and I recognized your name. Figured I owed it to your father's memory to make sure his daughter did not get cheated." They had reached the edge of town now, where the buildings gave way to open grassland and the first gentle slopes of the mountains. The stars were coming out overhead, brilliant and infinite in the clear mountain air. Sarah had walked this road 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different, less familiar. Everything felt different with Quinn Dalton beside her. "You must have been very skilled to draw 4 10s, Sarah said, "or very lucky." Quinn glanced at her, and in the faint starlight she saw amusement in his expression. "I am a fair hand at cards," he admitted, "but I will tell you a secret, Sarah. I was not bluffing when I said that marker was a forgery. I knew your father would never gamble away his farm, which meant those men were trying to steal it. That made me angry enough to risk my stake." $2,000 is a lot to risk on principle, Sarah observed. "It was not all my money," Quinn said. "I had about 600 to my name. The rest I borrowed from the bartender, who also thought Big Jack was crooked and was happy to fund someone willing to call him on it. I will have to pay him back, but he gave me good terms." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him, the deed still clutched in her hands. "You risked money you did not even have to save my farm?" Quinn shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her intensity. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Something shifted inside Sarah's chest, something she had not felt since before her father died, maybe not since before her mother passed away when she was 12. It was a feeling of safety, of being seen and valued by another person. She had spent so much of her life being strong, being capable, being the one who solved problems and kept going no matter what. To have someone step in and fight for her, to have this stranger risk everything on her behalf, was overwhelming. "Thank you," she said again, knowing the words were inadequate, but not having anything better. "Truly, Quinn, thank you." They resumed walking, the lights of Bannack fading behind them. Quinn's horse plodded along patiently, and the only sounds were their footsteps and the distant call of a night bird. After a while, Sarah began pointing out landmarks. The lightning-struck pine that marked the turn-off to the Anderson place, the creek where she caught trout in the summer, the hill where wildflowers grew in such profusion each spring that the whole slope looked like a painted canvas. Quinn listened without interrupting, asking occasional questions that showed he was genuinely interested. Sarah found herself talking more than she had in months, telling him about the farm and the animals and her plans for next year's planting. It felt good to share these thoughts with someone, to have an audience for all the ideas and dreams she had been keeping locked inside her head. The farmhouse appeared as they crested a small rise, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. It was not much to look at, just a simple structure of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch, but Sarah loved every inch of it. The barn stood nearby, and beyond it were the chicken coop, the root cellar, and the small paddock where she kept her milk cow and her father's old plow horse. "It is not fancy," Sarah said, suddenly self-conscious about the humble nature of her home. "But it is mine. Ours, I mean. It was my family's." "It looks like a good solid place," Quinn said. "Your father built it well." Sarah led him to the porch and lit the lantern that hung beside the door. In its warm glow, she could see Quinn's face more clearly, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun, the hard set of his jaw that suggested he had seen and done things he did not talk about. He was older than her, she realized, probably by 6 or 7 years. Old enough to have experience, but young enough to still have the lean strength of youth. "Would you like to come in?" Sarah asked, then immediately felt her face heat with embarrassment. It was not proper for a single woman to invite a man into her home at night, not without a chaperone or a good reason. "I mean, I could make coffee, and you did say it was a long walk back to town, so maybe you would like to rest before you go." Quinn's expression softened. "Coffee would be nice," he said, "but then I should head back. I do not want to damage your reputation by staying too long." Sarah unlocked the door and led him inside, lighting more lamps to push back the darkness. The main room of the house served as kitchen, dining area, and parlor all in one. It was clean and neat, if sparsely furnished. With her mother's old rocking chair by the fireplace and her father's pipe still sitting on the mantel where he had left it the morning he died, she moved quickly to the stove and coaxed the coals back to life, adding kindling and a few larger pieces of wood until she had a good fire going. Quinn stood near the door, his hat in his hands, looking around with frank curiosity. Sarah busied herself with the coffee pot, measuring grounds and water, very aware of his presence in her space. When the coffee was brewing, she finally turned to face him. "I do not understand why you did what you did tonight," she said. "You barely knew my father, and you do not know me at all. Those men could have killed you." Quinn set his hat on the table and met her eyes. "They could have tried," he said, "but I have been in tighter spots. As for why I did it, I told you. It was the right thing to do. Your father was a good man, and you deserve to keep what is yours." "Most people would not have gotten involved," Sarah persisted. "Most people would have walked away and let me fight my own battles." "Maybe," Quinn acknowledged, "but I am not most people. I have spent a lot of years drifting from place to place, taking jobs that pay but do not mean much. When I saw what those gamblers were trying to do to you, I saw a chance to do something that mattered, something that was clearly right instead of just expedient. I took it. That is all." The coffee began to boil, and Sarah poured 2 cups, adding sugar to hers and offering the bowl to Quinn, who shook his head. They sat down at the table, and for a few minutes they just drank in comfortable silence. Sarah studied Quinn over the rim of her cup, trying to understand this man who had dropped into her life like a stone into a still pond, sending ripples in every direction. "What will you do now?" she asked finally. "Will you leave Bannack?" Quinn turned his cup slowly between his hands. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have no particular place to be. Like I said, the job I came here for fell through." An idea was forming in Sarah's mind, reckless and impulsive, and completely unlike her usual careful nature. She tried to push it away, but it kept coming back, insistent and appealing. Finally, she gave in to it. "I could use some help on the farm," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "The haying needs to be done soon, and there is a section of fence that is falling down, and the barn roof has a leak I cannot reach to fix. I cannot pay much, but I could offer room and board, and maybe a little cash at the end of the season if the harvest is good." Quinn looked up at her, surprise evident in his face. "You are offering me a job?" "I am offering you a chance to put down roots," Sarah said, her heart hammering. "Even if it is just for a few months." She could see him considering it, weighing the offer against whatever plans or lack of plans he had made for himself. Sarah held her breath, surprised by how much she wanted him to say yes. It was not just about needing help on the farm, although she certainly did need help. It was about the way he had defended her, the way he had listened to her talk about her land, the way his presence made her feel less alone in the world. "All right," Quinn said finally. "I will stay for the season, help you get the place back in shape, but I pay my own way. You give me a place to sleep and meals, and I will do the work. No need to pay me cash on top of that." Relief and joy flooded through Sarah in equal measure. "That is not fair to you," she protested. "Your labor is worth money." "My labor is worth what I say it is worth," Quinn replied with a slight smile, And right now, what it is worth to me is a quiet place to stay and home-cooked meals. I have money enough to meet my needs, and I do not require much. Besides, I still owe that bartender, so any extra cash I earn will just go to paying off that debt anyway. Sarah wanted to argue further, but she could see that Quinn's mind was made up. Instead, she found herself smiling back at him, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Then we have an arrangement," she said. "You can sleep in the barn for tonight. Tomorrow, I will help you fix up the back room. It is small, but it has a real bed and a window, and it will be more comfortable than a pile of hay." "The barn will be fine," Quinn assured her. "I have slept in worse places." They finished their coffee, and Sarah walked Quinn out to the barn carrying a lantern to light their way. The building smelled of hay and animals, familiar and comforting. She showed him where the blankets were stored and pointed out the cleanest corner, where the hay was fresh and the roof did not leak. "I will have breakfast ready at dawn," Sarah said, reluctant to leave, but knowing she should. "If you need anything during the night, the house is always open." "I will be fine," Quinn said. "Sleep well, Sarah." "Sleep well, Quinn." Sarah walked back to the house alone, the deed to her farm still tucked safely in her pocket. She went inside and locked the door, then stood for a long moment in the middle of her kitchen, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she had woken up alone and struggling. Tonight she had her farm secured and a man who was clearly capable and kind preparing to sleep in her barn. The world had shifted on its axis, and Sarah was not entirely sure what to make of it. She prepared for bed mechanically, washing her face in the basin and braiding her long brown hair. When she finally lay down, she expected to fall asleep immediately, exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the evening. Instead, she found herself staring at the ceiling, thinking about Quinn Dalton and his storm-gray eyes, about the easy confidence with which he had faced down 3 armed gamblers, about the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her. Sarah had not thought much about romance or marriage since her father died. There had been no time for such considerations when she was busy just trying to survive. But now, lying in the darkness of her room with a stranger sleeping in her barn, she felt the stirrings of something she had almost forgotten existed. Attraction, yes, but also possibility. The sense that maybe her life did not have to be an endless succession of hard work and loneliness, that maybe there was room for something more. She fell asleep thinking about the way Quinn's fingers had brushed hers when he handed her the deed, and she dreamed of storm clouds and starlight. Sarah woke before dawn, as was her habit, and dressed quickly in the practical work clothes she wore around the farm, a simple cotton dress with an apron over it, sturdy boots, and her hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun. She started a fire in the stove and began preparing breakfast, mixing biscuit dough and slicing bacon from the slab she kept in the root cellar. By the time the sun began to paint the eastern sky with shades of pink and gold, she had a substantial meal ready: biscuits, bacon, eggs from her chickens, and strong coffee. She was just setting the table when she heard footsteps on the porch. Quinn knocked politely before entering, his hat in his hand. He looked well rested despite his night in the barn, and he had clearly taken the time to wash up at the pump, because his face was clean and his hair was damp. "Good morning," Sarah said, feeling suddenly shy. In the bright light of morning, the previous night seemed almost dreamlike. Had she really hired this man to work on her farm after knowing him for only a few hours? "Morning," Quinn replied. He sniffed appreciatively. "That smells wonderful. I cannot remember the last time I had a home-cooked breakfast." They sat down to eat, and Sarah was pleased to see that Quinn had a healthy appetite. He complimented her cooking and asked intelligent questions about the farm's operations, making note of what livestock she had, how much land was under cultivation, and what her main crops were. Sarah explained that she focused primarily on vegetables for her own use and hay to sell to ranchers in the area, with a small field of wheat that she took to the mill in town. "My father always said it was better to grow things people needed than to chase after gold," Sarah said. "The prospectors came and went, but farmers could make a steady living if they were smart about it." "Your father was a wise man," Quinn said. "Too many folks came west expecting to get rich quick and ended up broke and broken instead." After breakfast, Quinn insisted on washing the dishes while Sarah went out to milk the cow and feed the chickens. When she returned with a pail of fresh milk, She found the kitchen clean and Quinn waiting for her with a patient expression. "Show me that fence that needs mending," he said. They spent the morning working on the fence line that ran along the eastern boundary of Sarah's property. Quinn proved to be exactly as capable as she had hoped, working steadily and efficiently without complaint. He had brought tools from the barn, and he quickly assessed what needed to be done, replacing rotten posts and restringing wire with practiced ease. Sarah worked alongside him, holding posts steady while he tamped dirt around them, handing him tools as he needed them. The work was hard but satisfying, and Sarah found herself relaxing into Quinn's company. He was not much of a talker while he worked, but when he did speak, it was usually something interesting or useful. He told her about fencing techniques he had learned from ranchers in Wyoming, and he pointed out where previous repairs had been done poorly and would likely fail again soon. They developed an easy rhythm, working together as if they had been doing it for years instead of hours. By midday, they had made significant progress. Sarah suggested they break for lunch, and they walked back to the house together, both dusty and sweating from their labors. Sarah prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken left over from a few nights ago, and they ate on the porch where they could catch the breeze. "You work hard," Quinn observed, watching as Sarah ate with efficient hunger. "Most women I know would not be out digging fence posts." Sarah shrugged. "Most women I know have husbands or fathers or brothers to do the heavy work. I have myself, so I learned to do what needs doing." "Your father taught you well," Quinn said. "He taught me everything," Sarah agreed. "How to shoot, how to handle livestock, how to fix things when they broke. He said that depending on anyone else was a good way to end up helpless. And he wanted me to be able to take care of myself no matter what happened." "I wish more fathers thought that way," Quinn said. "I have seen too many women left destitute because they were never taught how to manage on their own." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the farm, chickens clucking in their coop, the cow lowing in the barn, the wind rustling through the grass. Sarah felt more content than she had in a long time, and she realized it was not just because the fence was getting repaired or the farm was secure. It was because she had company, someone to share the work and the meal and the quiet moments with. After lunch, they tackled the barn roof. Quinn climbed up with a sure-footedness that Sarah envied, and she handed up shingles and nails from below. He moved methodically across the roof, replacing damaged shingles and checking for other weak spots. Sarah watched him work, admiring the competent way he handled himself, and found her thoughts drifting in dangerous directions. She barely knew this man. He had appeared in her life less than 24 hours ago, and yet already she felt drawn to him in ways that were both exciting and terrifying. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that anyone would feel warmly towards someone who had saved their home and was now helping to maintain it. But she knew, deep in her heart, that it was more than that. There was something about Quinn Dalton that called to her, something that made her want to know everything about him, to understand what had shaped him into the man he was. "Sarah?" Quinn's voice broke into her thoughts. "Did you hear me?" She realized she had been staring into space. "I am sorry. What did you say?" "I said I think we are done up here. The roof should hold for another few years now." Quinn climbed down the ladder and Sarah stepped back to give him room. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and there was a smudge of tar on his cheek. Without thinking, Sarah reached up and wiped it away with her thumb. The moment her skin touched his, she felt that same shock of warmth she had felt the previous night, and she froze, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Quinn went very still, his eyes locked on hers. For a heartbeat, Sarah thought he might kiss her, and she realized that she wanted him to, that she had been wanting him to all day without consciously acknowledging it. But then Quinn stepped back, breaking the contact, and the moment passed. "I should wash up," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "and then I will get started on that back room you mentioned, make it livable." "Right," Sarah said, feeling flustered and confused. "Yes, that is a good idea." She watched him walk toward the pump, then turned and fled into the house, her heart racing. What was she thinking, touching him like that? What was she doing? Feeling these things for a man she had just met. She needed to get control of herself, to remember that Quinn was here to work, not to be the object of her sudden and inconvenient attraction. Sarah threw herself into household tasks, baking bread and scrubbing floors with more vigor than necessary. Through the window, she could see Quinn hauling his gear from the barn to the small back room that had once been her father's study. She had not been in there since he died, had not been able to face sorting through his papers and personal effects. Now she felt guilty that Quinn would be sleeping in a room full of her father's things, but when she went to help him clear it out, she found he had already done most of the work. "I put everything in these crates," Quinn said, gesturing to 3 wooden boxes stacked neatly in the corner. "I figured you would want to go through it all when you were ready, so I did not throw anything away, but I moved it to make room for the bed." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've been meaning to do that for months, but I could not seem to make myself start." "Loss is hard," Quinn said simply. "It takes its own time." They stood there in the small room, surrounded by the remnants of her father's life and the beginning of Quinn's presence in hers, and Sarah felt the world shift again. This man understood grief. He understood hard work and responsibility, and the way life could knock you down, but you had to keep getting up. He understood her, or at least he seemed to, more than anyone else had in a very long time. "Quinn," she started, not sure what she wanted to say, but he shook his head gently. "Let us just take this one day at a time, he said. "I am here to help you with the farm. Everything else can wait." Sarah nodded, grateful for his wisdom, even as part of her wanted to ignore it. They spent the rest of the afternoon in separate tasks, Sarah working in the vegetable garden and Quinn repairing a broken stall door in the barn. They came together again for dinner, which Sarah had prepared with extra care. Roast chicken, fresh vegetables, and an apple pie made from preserves her mother had put up years ago. Quinn praised the meal lavishly, and they talked about neutral topics: the weather, the upcoming harvest, news from town. It was pleasant and comfortable, and by the time they finished eating, Sarah felt more settled. Quinn was right. They had time. There was no need to rush anything or force feelings that might just be a product of circumstance and proximity. After dinner, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset over the mountains. The sky turned spectacular shades of orange and purple, and the first stars began to appear. Sarah sat in her father's old chair, and Quinn sat on the porch railing, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "This is nice," Quinn said quietly. "Peaceful. I had forgotten what peaceful felt like." "What kind of life have you been living?" Sarah asked. "You said you drift from place to place, but that is not really an answer." Quinn was silent for a long moment, and Sarah thought he might not respond. Then he began to talk, his voice low and measured. "I grew up in Missouri," he said, "on a farm not too different from this one. When the war came, I was 17, and I joined up with the Union. My father disowned me for it. He was a Southern sympathizer, and he said I was a traitor to my family and my state. I never saw him again after that. My mother died while I was away fighting, and my sisters married and moved on. When the war ended, I had no reason to go back, so I just started moving west. I have been moving ever since." Sarah's heart ached for the young man he had been, cut off from his family and forced to make his own way in a hostile world. "Do you ever think about settling down?" she asked. "Sometimes," Quinn admitted, "but I have never found a place that felt like home. Or maybe I have never let myself find it, because finding it would mean admitting that I am alone and will likely stay that way." "You are not alone right now," Sarah said softly. Quinn turned to look at her, and in the fading light his expression was unreadable. "No," he agreed. "Right now I am not." They sat together until full dark, talking about small things and large ones, about Quinn's years of wandering and Sarah's years of staying, about what they hoped for and what they feared. By the time Sarah finally bid him goodnight and went inside, she felt as if she had known him for years instead of days. She fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the physical labor and the emotional intensity of the day, and she slept more soundly than she had since her father died. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Sarah and Quinn would rise early, share breakfast, and then tackle whatever tasks the farm demanded. They mended the rest of the fence, patched holes in the barn walls, weeded the garden, and began the laborious process of cutting and baling hay. The work was endless, but it felt manageable with two people sharing the load. As they worked side by side, Sarah found herself learning things about Quinn that went beyond the stories he told. She learned that he was methodical and careful, that he never started a job without thinking through the best way to accomplish it. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh at unexpected moments. She learned that he was gentle with animals, that her chickens trusted him almost immediately, and that even her standoffish cow seemed to soften around him. Most importantly, she learned that she was falling in love with him. It was not a sudden realization, but a gradual awareness that crept up on her over the course of those summer days. It was in the way her heart lifted when she saw him each morning, in the way she found excuses to work near him, in the way she caught herself watching him when she should have been focused on her own tasks. It was in the long conversations they had over meals and the comfortable silences that fell between them when words were not necessary. It was in the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that was both tender and yearning. Sarah had no idea if Quinn felt the same way. He was unfailingly polite and kind, but he maintained a careful distance between them, never touching her unless absolutely necessary, never saying anything that could be construed as romantic. She told herself that this was for the best, that she should not let her feelings run away with her, but her heart did not listen to logic. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after Quinn had arrived, they were working together in the hayfield, stacking bales in the wagon to be hauled back to the barn. It was hot, brutal work, and Sarah's back ached from bending and lifting. Quinn had removed his shirt, and Sarah tried very hard not to stare at the lean muscles of his back and shoulders, at the way sweat made his skin gleam in the sunlight. They had just finished loading the wagon when the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. 3 riders were coming across the field, moving fast. Sarah felt her stomach drop when she recognized the lead rider, Big Jack Thornton. "Get behind me," Quinn said quietly, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Sarah realized he had been wearing it every day since the card game, even while working. "I thought they left town," Sarah said, fear making her voice shake. "So did I," Quinn replied. "Looks like they decided to come back." Big Jack and his companions reined in their horses a few yards away, kicking up dust. All 3 men were armed, and they were positioned to surround Sarah and Quinn. This was not a chance encounter, Sarah realized. They had been watching, waiting for an opportunity. "Dalton," Big Jack said, his voice dripping with false friendliness, "I have been thinking about our last meeting, and I have decided I was not treated fairly." "You lost a card game," Quinn said, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "That is not unfair. That is just bad luck." "I think you cheated," Big Jack said flatly. "I think you had cards up your sleeve or a partner signaling you. No one is that lucky without help." "If you want to call me a cheat, then come down off that horse and say it to my face," Quinn invited. "Otherwise, turn around and ride out because you have no business on this property." Dutch Keller urged his horse a few steps closer. His hand rested on his pistol, and his eyes were cold. "We think you owe us," he said. "That farm should be ours, and that money you took from us should be back in our pockets." "What you think does not matter," Quinn said. "The game was fair, and you lost. Now leave before this gets uglier than it needs to." Silas Reed laughed, a nasty sound. "3 against 1, Dalton. Even you are not fast enough to take all of us." "Maybe not," Quinn agreed, "but I will sure get 1 or 2 of you, and I am betting none of you wants to be the one lying in the dirt. So ask yourselves, is this really worth dying over?" For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Then from behind the barn, another voice rang out. "I would make that 3 against 4 if we are counting." Sarah turned to see Charlie Mitchell, the owner of the neighboring ranch, riding toward them with his foreman, both armed with rifles. Charlie was a grizzled old cattleman who had been friends with Sarah's father, and he had always kept a neighborly eye on the Zimmerman farm. "Saw you boys riding this way," Charlie called out as he and his foreman took up positions flanking Sarah and Quinn. "Figured you might be thinking of causing trouble, and I thought I would remind you that folks around here look after each other." Big Jack's expression turned ugly. "This is none of your concern, Mitchell." "When someone threatens my neighbor, it becomes my concern," Charlie said mildly. "Now, I know Sheriff Dalton already ran you boys out of town once. I do not think he will be happy to hear you came back to harass Miss Zimmerman. In fact, I think I will ride into Bannack right now and let him know. Unless you would prefer to save me the trip by leaving permanently?" The three gamblers exchanged glances. They were outgunned now, and they knew it. Finally, Big Jack jerked his horse's head around. "This is not over, Dalton," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Quinn said quietly. "Next time I see you, I will not be so patient. I will just shoot you and claim self-defense. Test me if you do not believe me." Big Jack spurred his horse and rode off, Silas and Dutch following. Sarah, Quinn, Charlie, and the foreman watched until they disappeared over the horizon. Only then did Sarah allow herself to breathe. "Thank you, Charlie," she said, her voice shaking. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not shown up." "Probably nothing good," Charlie said. He looked at Quinn with frank curiosity. "You must be the fellow who won Sarah's farm back from those cheats. Name's Charlie Mitchell. I own the spread to the north." "Quincy Dalton," Quinn said, shaking the older man's hand, "and I appreciate the help." "Least I could do," Charlie said. "Tom Zimmerman was a good friend of mine, and I promised him I would keep an eye on Sarah if anything ever happened to him. I have been meaning to ride over and introduce myself to you, Dalton, seeing as how you are working here now. Wanted to make sure you were a decent sort." "I try to be," Quinn said. Charlie studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you do. Listen, those boys are going to keep being a problem until someone makes them stop. I will talk to the sheriff, get him to put out word that they are not welcome in this territory, but you watch yourself and you watch Sarah. Men like that do not take losing well." "I will," Quinn promised. Charlie and his foreman rode off, and Sarah finally let herself lean against the wagon, her legs suddenly weak. Quinn was at her side immediately, his hand on her arm to steady her. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his face. "I thought they were going to kill you," Sarah said, the words tumbling out. "I thought they were going to shoot you and take the farm anyway, and there was nothing I could do to stop them." "Hey," Quinn said gently, turning her to face him, "I am fine. We are both fine. They are gone." "For now," Sarah said, "but they will come back. You heard Big Jack? He is not going to let this go." "Then we will deal with it when they come back," Quinn said. "Sarah, look at me. I'm not going to let anything happen to you or this farm. I promise you that." Sarah looked up into his gray eyes and saw absolute certainty there. This man, who had known her for less than a month, was willing to put his life on the line to protect her. The realization made something break open inside her chest, and before she could think better of it, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Quinn stood frozen, clearly shocked. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a fierce intensity that stole her breath. Sarah melted into him, feeling safe and desired and alive in a way she had never experienced before. The kiss went on, both of them pouring weeks of restrained longing into it, until finally they broke apart, both breathing hard. "Sarah," Quinn said, his voice rough, "I should not have done that. I work for you. This is not appropriate." "I kissed you," Sarah pointed out, "and I do not care what is appropriate." "I care about you, Quinn. I think I have cared about you since the moment you stood up for me in that saloon. I am tired of pretending I do not feel this way." Quinn cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. "You deserve better than a drifter with no prospects and a past he is not proud of." "I deserve to decide what I want," Sarah countered, "and I want you. If you do not feel the same way, tell me now, and we can forget this ever happened. But if you do feel something for me, then stop pushing me away." "Feel something for you?" Quinn laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, I am half crazy with wanting you. Every day I work beside you and share meals with you and listen to you talk about your dreams. And every day I fall a little more in love with you. But I kept telling myself it was not fair to you, that I should not burden you with my feelings when you have so much else to worry about." "You love me," Sarah whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I love you," Quinn confirmed. "I think I started loving you that first night when you stood up to those gamblers even though you were terrified. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you bite your lower lip when you are concentrating. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you see the beauty in this land. I love everything about you, and it scares me how much I want to stay here forever." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but they were happy tears. "Then stay," she said. "Stay with me, Quinn. Not as someone I hired, but as my partner. As my husband, if you will have me." Quinn kissed her again, gentler this time, full of promise and hope. "Yes," he said against her lips. "Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to everything." They stood there in the hayfield, holding each other as the sun beat down, and the wagon waited to be unloaded. And Sarah felt as if her entire world had rearranged itself into something brighter and more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. She and Quinn worked the farm together as partners now, making decisions jointly and planning for a future that belonged to both of them. They talked about where to build an addition onto the house, about buying more livestock, about the children they hoped to have someday. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering the 1,000 small ways in which they fit together. They were married in early September in a simple ceremony at the small church in Bannack. Charlie Mitchell stood up as Quinn's witness, and a kind widow named Mrs. Patterson stood up for Sarah. The preacher spoke about the sacred bonds of matrimony, about cleaving to one another through good times and bad, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed Sarah with such tenderness that several women in the small congregation openly wept. After the ceremony, there was a modest celebration at the farm. Charlie and his wife came, along with several other neighbors who had known Sarah's parents and wanted to wish the young couple well. The bartender from the Silver Dollar showed up with a bottle of good whiskey as a gift, and he told everyone the story of how Quinn had gambled to win back Sarah's farm, embellishing it until Quinn sounded like some kind of frontier hero. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Sarah and Quinn stood together on the porch of their home, watching the last wagon pull away. Quinn's arm was around Sarah's waist, and she leaned into him feeling completely content. "I never thought I would have this," Quinn said quietly. "A home, a wife, a future. I spent so many years convinced that I was meant to be alone." "You were never meant to be alone," Sarah said. "You were just waiting for the right person to give you a reason to stop." They went inside and closed the door on the world, beginning their life together as husband and wife in the house that Sarah's parents had built, and that she and Quinn would now fill with their own love and their own memories. The winter of 1873 was harsh, with heavy snows that drifted higher than the porch railing and temperatures that plunged well below zero. But inside the farmhouse, there was warmth and laughter. Quinn proved to be an attentive and affectionate husband, always ready with a helping hand or a kind word. He split wood and hauled water and kept the animals fed, and in the evenings he would read aloud to Sarah from the collection of books her mother had brought west, his deep voice bringing life to stories of adventure and romance. Sarah, for her part, discovered that she loved being married, loved the intimacy of sharing her life with someone who truly understood her. She loved waking up beside Quinn each morning and falling asleep in his arms each night. She loved the way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. She loved the future they were building together, one day at a time. In late January, as a particularly fierce blizzard howled outside, Sarah realized that she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had lost her own mother to childbirth complications with a stillborn sibling, and she knew the risks all too well. But when she told Quinn, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her fears receded. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Sarah, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am more than happy," Quinn said. "I am honored and grateful and more in love with you than ever. We are going to be a family, Sarah, a real family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Quinn was endlessly solicitous, insisting that Sarah rest more and taking on even more of the farm work himself. He brought in Charlie's wife, Margaret, to teach him about what Sarah would need during the birth, and he made sure they had everything ready well in advance. In late August of 1874, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Sarah went into labor. It was a long and difficult process, lasting through the night and into the following afternoon. Quinn stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragements when she was certain she could not endure another moment. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, perfectly healthy and astonishingly beautiful. Sarah held him against her chest, tears streaming down her face while Quinn knelt beside the bed with his own eyes suspiciously bright. "He's perfect," Quinn said, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but elated. Quinn was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Thomas, after your father, if that is all right with you." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "Thomas Dalton," she said, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." Baby Thomas was a good-natured child who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with serious dark eyes that reminded Sarah of Quinn's. He grew quickly, hitting each milestone right on schedule, and both Sarah and Quinn doted on him shamelessly. The farmhouse rang with the sounds of childhood, coos and babbles, then first words, then toddler chatter. Thomas's first word was "pa," which made Quinn walk around grinning for days. His second word was "ma," which evened things out nicely. As Thomas grew, so did the farm. With Quinn's help, Sarah expanded their operations, adding more fields and buying a small herd of cattle. They built a proper barn to replace the old ramshackle structure, and they added rooms onto the house to accommodate their growing family. When Thomas was 3, Sarah gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Elizabeth and Emma. 2 years after that came another son, James, and 3 years after him came the youngest, a daughter they called Rose. The Dalton family became a fixture in the Bannack community. Quinn served as a deputy sheriff for a while, helping to keep order in a town that was slowly transitioning from rough mining camp to settled community. Sarah became known for the quality of her produce and for her willingness to help neighbors in need, whether that meant sharing her harvest with a family fallen on hard times or sitting with a sick child while the parents got some rest. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. There were setbacks, of course, a drought one year, a flood the next, a fire in the barn that they thankfully caught before it spread. But through it all, Sarah and Quinn faced every challenge together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing season. Big Jack Thornton and his associates never returned to Bannack. Sarah heard years later that they had tried to run a similar scam in a town further south and had been caught by a vigilance committee. The punishment for such crimes was swift and final on the frontier. Sarah felt no satisfaction at the news, only a sense of relief that they would never threaten her family again. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Quinn took an evening off from farm duties and rode up to a high meadow that overlooked their land. It was late summer, and the wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the landscape in shades of purple and gold. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for 2 decades. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked, leaning against Quinn's shoulder. "Giving up your wandering ways to settle down here?" Quinn wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Not for a single second," he said. You gave me everything I did not know I needed: a home, a family, a purpose. I was just drifting before I met you, Sarah. You gave me a reason to live instead of just exist. You saved me too, Sarah said softly, not just from those gamblers, but from loneliness, from a life of just surviving instead of truly living. I love you, Quinn Dalton. I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you until my very last breath. Quinn kissed the top of her head. And I love you, Sarah Dalton. You are the best gamble I ever made. They sat together in the fading light, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful in the rugged wilderness of Montana. Below them, the farm spread out like a patchwork quilt. The fields they had planted and tended, the buildings they had erected and maintained, the home they had filled with love and laughter. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, the older ones watching the younger ones, all of them safe and happy on the land their parents had fought to keep. Thomas, now a young man of 19, was preparing to take over more of the farm duties, showing the same quiet competence his father had always demonstrated. Elizabeth and Emma, at 16, were bright and curious girls who loved books as much as their mother did. James, at 14, had his father's skill with horses and was already dreaming of expanding into breeding. And little Rose, just 11, was fearless and adventurous, always the first to volunteer for any new task. We did good, Quinn said, surveying their domain with justified pride. We did better than good, Sarah corrected. We built something that will last, Quinn. Something our children can build on and pass to their own children someday. This farm, this family, it is our legacy. Our love story, Quinn said, smiling at her in the way that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. Our love story, Sarah agreed. They stayed on the mountain until the stars came out, talking about the past and the future, about the children and the farm, about all the dreams they had already fulfilled and the ones they still held. Then they rode home together through the moonlight, hand in hand, two souls perfectly matched who had found their forever in the wild beauty of the Montana frontier. The farm continued to thrive under their stewardship. As Thomas grew into his role as the heir to the Dalton legacy, he showed not just his father's practical skills, but also his mother's head for business. He negotiated better prices for their crops and livestock, and he helped expand their operations to include a small dairy that supplied butter and cheese to the growing settlements in the region. Elizabeth, despite her love of books, proved to have a natural talent for healing. After helping deliver a neighbor's baby when the doctor could not arrive in time, she decided to pursue formal training. With her parents' blessing and financial support, she traveled to Denver for 2 years to study with an established physician, then returned to Bannack to serve as the town's first permanent medical practitioner. Emma, meanwhile, discovered a passion for teaching. She established a school in Bannack, providing education to children from families who otherwise would have had no access to learning. James fulfilled his dream of breeding horses, developing a line of sturdy, dependable animals that were sought after throughout Montana and Wyoming. His reputation for honesty and fair dealing made the Dalton name synonymous with quality. Rose, the youngest and most spirited of the children, surprised everyone by developing an interest in politics. She became an advocate for women's rights, speaking at public meetings and writing letters to newspapers about the need for female suffrage. Quinn and Sarah watched their children flourish with pride and wonder. They had given their offspring not just a home, but also the freedom to pursue their own paths, the confidence to dream big, and the values to stay grounded no matter how high they climbed. As the century turned and a new era dawned, Quinn and Sarah entered their twilight years with grace and gratitude. They slowed down naturally, leaving more of the physical work to Thomas and his young wife, a bright and capable woman named Catherine, whom he had met at a barn dance. But Quinn and Sarah remained active participants in farm life, offering advice when asked, helping with the grandchildren, and simply being present for the family they had created. On a cool autumn morning in 1908, as Sarah prepared breakfast and Quinn brought in wood for the stove, they paused to watch the sun rise over the mountains. They were both in their 50s now. their faces lined with age and experience, but their love was as strong as ever. "Remember the day we met?" Sarah asked, smiling at the memory. "When you stood up to those gamblers and won my farm back?" "Best day of my life," Quinn said without hesitation. "That was the day everything changed. The day I found my home." "Our home," Sarah corrected gently. "Our home?" Quinn agreed, pulling her into an embrace. "Our life, our love." They stood together in the kitchen of the house they had built and maintained for 35 years, holding each other as they had held each other through all the joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges of their shared journey. Around them the farm hummed with life. Grandchildren playing in the yard, cattle lowing in the fields, chickens scratching in the dirt. It was the sound of legacy, of family, of a love story that had begun with a gamble and grown into something eternal. Years continued to pass, and the Dalton family continued to grow and flourish. Thomas and Catherine had 5 children of their own, and before long the farmhouse was regularly filled with the laughter and chaos of grandchildren. Elizabeth married a fellow physician and set up a practice in a larger town, though she returned often to visit. Emma remained in Bannack, married to the local newspaper editor, raising 3 thoughtful, bookish children. James built a thriving horse ranch on land adjacent to the original farm, expanding the family's holdings and reputation. Rose, true to her fierce spirit, became one of Montana's most vocal advocates for women's suffrage, traveling throughout the state to speak and organize. Quinn and Sarah lived to see their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. They lived to see Montana achieve statehood in 1889, to see the railroad finally reach Bannack, to see the town transform from a rough mining settlement into a proper community with schools and churches and businesses. Through it all, they remained each other's greatest love and strongest support. They took daily walks together when weather permitted, Quinn's arm around Sarah's waist as they surveyed the land they had nurtured for so many years. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set as they had done countless times before, never tiring of the beauty or of each other's company. On a spring morning in 1919, Quinn Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep, Sarah beside him, as she had been for 46 years of marriage. He was 76 years old, and he left behind a legacy of love, integrity, and hard work that had shaped not just his family but the entire community. Sarah mourned him deeply but without regret. They had been given decades together when many couples got only years. They had built something beautiful and lasting. They had loved each other completely without reservation, from that first night in the saloon until Quinn's final breath. Sarah lived for another 5 years, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still offering advice about the farm, still telling stories about the old days, still keeping the memory of Quinn alive for the younger generations who had never known him in his prime. When Sarah Zimmerman Dalton died peacefully at the age of 73 in 1924, the whole town of Bannack turned out for her funeral. Person after person stood to speak about how Sarah had helped them, taught them, inspired them. They talked about her kindness, her strength, her unwavering commitment to family and community, but most of all they talked about the great love she had shared with Quinn, a love that had become legendary in the region. Sarah was buried next to Quinn on a hill overlooking the farm they had built together, under the shadow of the mountains they had both loved. Their headstone, paid for by their children, bore a simple inscription: Quinn and Sarah Dalton. Together in life, together in death. Love is the greatest gamble, and they won the farm, remained in the Dalton family for generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own touches but always maintaining the core values that Quinn and Sarah had established: hard work, integrity, and love. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure, the rooms that Tom Zimmerman had built, and that Quinn and Sarah had filled with their family remained at the heart of it. Visitors to the farm in later years would sometimes ask about the old couple in the portrait that hung over the fireplace, the stern-looking man with gray eyes and the woman beside him with gentle smile and work-worn hands. The Dalton descendants would tell the story, passed down through the generations, of how Quinn had gambled to save Sarah's farm, of how a love story had begun in a smoky saloon on a desperate night in 1873. They would tell how that love had grown and deepened over the years, weathering every storm, celebrating every triumph, creating a family and a legacy that endured. They would tell how Quinn Dalton, a drifter with no home and no hope, had found everything he needed in a woman named Sarah Zimmerman, and how she had found in him not just a savior, but a partner, a lover, and a true companion of the soul. It was a love story born in the Wild West, forged in hardship, and strengthened by devotion. It was a love story that began with gamblers trying to steal a farm and a cowboy who called their bluff. But most importantly, it was a love story that lasted forever, echoing through the generations, a testament to the power of two people who found each other against all odds and chose to build a life together in the beautiful, unforgiving landscape of Montana. The sun continued to rise over the mountains each morning, casting golden light across the fields that Quinn and Sarah had planted. The seasons turned as they always had, bringing snow and mud and green growth and harvest. The land endured as it always had, and so did the love story of Quinn and Sarah Dalton, living on in the family they had created and the home they had built, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures in life come not from gold or land or wealth, but from finding the one person who makes you whole and choosing to walk beside them through all the days of your life. Their story became more than just family history. It became a part of the fabric of Bannack itself, woven into the town's identity. Older residents would point out the Silver Dollar Saloon, now converted into a historical museum, and tell newcomers about the night Quinn Dalton won back Sarah Zimmerman's farm in a poker game. The tale grew in the telling, as such stories do, but the essential truth remained. Two people had found each other in difficult circumstances and had built something beautiful that lasted. School children in Bannack learned about the Daltons in their local history classes. They learned how the couple had helped transform the town from a rough mining camp into a stable agricultural community. They learned about Elizabeth Dalton's contributions to medicine, Emma Dalton's work in education, James Dalton's impact on the region's horse breeding industry, and Rose Dalton's activism for women's rights. But most of all, they learned about the love story at the center of it all, the romance that had sparked in a moment of crisis and grown into something that defined an entire family. The Dalton farm became a landmark, a place where visitors could see what frontier life had been like, how people had lived and worked and loved in the Wild West. The current generation of Daltons, Quinn and Sarah's great-great-grandchildren, maintained the property with care, preserving the original buildings while also keeping the farm operational and profitable. They grew organic vegetables and raised heritage livestock, adapting to modern markets while honoring their ancestors' commitment to the land. On special occasions, the entire extended Dalton family would gather at the farm for reunions. There would be dozens of people spanning 5 or 6 generations, all descended from that union between a wandering cowboy and a determined farm girl. They would share meals and stories, play games, and take walks through the fields, and inevitably someone would propose a toast to Quinn and Sarah, the patriarch and matriarch whose love had made it all possible. The older family members would share their memories. I remember my grandmother Sarah, Quinn's daughter Elizabeth, telling me about how her father used to read to the whole family every evening, how his voice would bring the stories to life. Or, my grandfather Thomas Dalton, Sarah and Quinn's firstborn, used to say that his parents never went to bed angry, that they always talked things through no matter how late it got or how tired they were. The younger generations would listen to these stories with reverence, understanding that they were the inheritors of something special. They carried not just the Dalton name, but also the Dalton values, the commitment to hard work, the belief in standing up for what is right, the understanding that love requires not just passion, but also patience, compromise, and unwavering loyalty. The portrait of Quinn and Sarah that hung over the fireplace had been painted in 1893 on their 20th wedding anniversary by a traveling artist who had been passing through Bannack. In it, Quinn stood behind Sarah's chair, his hand resting on her shoulder, both of them looking directly at the viewer with calm, confident expressions. They were in their 40s then, still vigorous and active, but the painting captured something timeless about them, the deep connection between them, the sense of partnership and mutual respect, the love that shone from their eyes even in a formal portrait. That painting had witnessed generations of Dalton family life. It had looked down on christenings and weddings, birthday celebrations and anniversary parties, quiet family dinners, and chaotic holiday gatherings. It had been a constant presence, a reminder to each new generation of the foundation upon which they stood. As the 21st century progressed and the world changed in ways Quinn and Sarah never could have imagined, the Dalton farm remained a constant, a link to the past and a promise to the future. The current Daltons use modern technology, of course, tractors instead of horse-drawn plows, computers to manage their accounts, solar panels to supplement their electricity, but they did so in service of the same goals their ancestors had pursued: to live well on the land, to contribute to their community, to raise their children with strong values, and to honor the love story that had started it all. On the 150th anniversary of Quinn and Sarah's first meeting in the Silver Dollar Saloon, the Dalton family organized a special celebration. They invited the entire town of Bannack, as well as descendants of other families who had known Quinn and Sarah personally. Historians came to speak about life in Montana in the 1870s. The current owner of what had once been the Silver Dollar Saloon brought historical documents showing the property records from that era. A local actress performed a one-woman show about Sarah's life, based on diaries and letters that had been preserved in the family archives. But the highlight of the celebration was a simple ceremony at the graveside of Quinn and Sarah Dalton. The current family patriarch, a great-great-grandson named Thomas Dalton IV, spoke to the assembled crowd. "Quinn and Sarah Dalton lived in a different world than we do," he said, his voice carrying across the hill. "They faced hardships we can barely imagine and worked harder than most of us will ever have to. But the thing that sustained them through all of it, the thing that made their life not just bearable but beautiful, was their love for each other. That love was the foundation of everything. This farm, this family, the contributions they made to this community. When Quinn gambled to win back Sarah's farm, he was not just saving property, he was saving the possibility of their future together. And what a future they built." He paused, looking out at the crowd. Dalton descendants, yes, but also neighbors, friends, townspeople whose own family stories intersected with the Daltons in various ways. We are all here because of a choice they made, to love each other fully and build a life together. We are all here because a drifting cowboy decided to settle down, and a struggling farmer's daughter decided to trust him. We are all here because they refused to let circumstances defeat them, because they chose hope over despair, partnership over isolation, love over fear. As Thomas spoke, the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same glorious shades of orange and purple that Quinn and Sarah had watched countless times from their porch. It felt, to everyone present, like a benediction, as if Quinn and Sarah themselves were looking down from wherever they were and giving their blessing to this celebration of their love. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared stories, an elderly woman approached Thomas. She introduced herself as Margaret Thornton, and she said that her grandfather had been Big Jack Thornton, one of the gamblers who had tried to steal Sarah's farm. Thomas stiffened slightly, unsure how to respond to this revelation. But Margaret held up a hand. "I am not here to defend what my grandfather did," she said quietly. "He was a cheat and a bully, and he got what he deserved. But I wanted you to know that late in his life, after he had been run out of Montana and ended up broke and broken in Arizona, he used to tell the story of Quinn Dalton. He would say that Dalton was the only man who had ever beaten him fair and square, and that sometimes he wondered what his life would have been like if he had taken that loss as a lesson instead of a grudge. She looked up at the portrait of Quinn and Sarah that had been brought out for the celebration and displayed on an easel near their graves. "Your ancestors won more than a poker game that night," Margaret said. "They won the right to build something good and lasting. My grandfather spent the rest of his life losing things while Quinn and Sarah spent theirs building. I just wanted you to know that even the people who opposed them recognized eventually that they were remarkable." Thomas thanked her for sharing that story, and they parted with mutual respect. It was another piece of the puzzle, another thread in the tapestry of Quinn and Sarah's story, and it would be passed down to future generations along with all the rest. As darkness fell and the celebration wound down, the Dalton family gathered one last time at Quinn and Sarah's grave. They held hands in a large circle, young and old together, and they sang a hymn that Sarah had loved, one that spoke of grace and mercy and the eternal nature of love. Their voices rose into the Montana night, carrying with them the gratitude of generations, the acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid, but would always be honored. Then, one by one, they placed wildflowers on the grave, the same kinds of flowers that grew on the hillside where Quinn and Sarah had sat on their 20th anniversary, talking about their life and their love. The flowers would wilt and fade, as flowers do, but more would be brought next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, for as long as there were Daltons to remember and honor the love story that had made them all possible. As the last Dalton descendant placed their flower and stepped back, a breeze picked up, rustling through the grass and carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and pine. It felt like a whisper, like a voice from the past saying, "We loved well, we lived well. Remember us, but do not mourn. We had everything we ever wanted." And in that moment, standing on the hill overlooking the farm that Quinn had gambled everything to save, surrounded by the family that he and Sarah had created, it was impossible not to feel that they were still there somehow, still watching over the land and the people they had loved so much. The stars came out, brilliant and infinite in the clear Montana sky, the same stars that had shone down on Quinn and Sarah during their lifetime, the same stars that had witnessed their courtship and their wedding and the building of their life together. Those stars would continue to shine long after everyone present had joined Quinn and Sarah in whatever lay beyond. But the love story would endure, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people could build when they found each other and chose to fight for their future together. As the crowd dispersed and people made their way back to their cars and homes, Thomas Dalton IV stood for a moment longer at his ancestor's grave. He thought about the gamble Quinn had taken that night in the Silver Dollar Saloon, about how easily it could have gone wrong, about how different all their lives would be if Quinn had lost that hand of poker, or if he had never walked into that saloon in the first place. But he had walked in and he had gambled, and he had won, and in winning, he had gained everything: a home, a wife, a family, a purpose, a legacy that would outlive him by generations. It was the ultimate happy ending, the fairy tale made real through courage and love and unwavering commitment. Thomas placed his hand on the headstone, feeling the sun-warmed granite beneath his palm. "Thank you," he whispered to his great-great-grandparents. "Thank you for loving each other. Thank you for building this family. Thank you for showing us what it means to truly live." Then he turned and walked down the hill, toward his own wife and children, toward his own life and his own chance to add to the Dalton legacy. Behind him, the grave stood peaceful in the starlight, the flowers bright against the dark earth, and if Quinn and Sarah Dalton could have seen it, they would have smiled. Their gamble had paid off beyond their wildest dreams, and their love story would echo through time, inspiring generations yet unborn to believe in the power of love, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the possibility of building something beautiful even in the hardest of circumstances. The farm continued, the family grew, the love endured, And in Bannack, Montana, on a hill overlooking land that had been worked by Dalton hands for over 150 years, two graves stood as silent testimony to a love story that began with a card game and ended, as all the best love stories do, with forever.